quickly on the brisk wind. Highs of 19 Celsius, so feeling rather fresher. Further showers are likely across northeast England through Saturday afternoon, though they won't be as heavy as they were on Friday. Spells of sunshine will lift temperatures to around 20 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells across Scotland, but also the risk of some showers. Winds will continue to increase across western parts of the country, highs reaching around 18 or 19 Celsius. An unseasonably windy afternoon for Northern Ireland, with gales developing around the coasts. Sunshine and showers for many and feeling cool for this time of year, highs of 17. Staying unsettled into the evening for many, with blustery showers most frequently across the west of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. It's 2 o'clock and I'm in County Durham actually today, broadcasting. We're going to be discussing Boris Johnson, folks, defending his leadership by claiming that voters want to hear less about what he's called things he stuffed up, following a double by-election. Pretty vicious stuff. Speaking from the Commonwealth, heads of government meeting in Rwanda, the Prime Minister has actually said that the public actually want to hear more about the big issues that matter to all of you. I couldn't agree with him more, to be honest with you, actually. Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, has told GB News that the public want Mr Johnson to go. I'm not sure that's true about everyone, but let's hear what the news packages have got to tell us today.
Thanks, Darren. It's just after 2 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Well, as Darren was saying, Boris Johnson has defended his leadership by claiming voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up following a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, the Prime Minister said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Well, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, told GB News the public want Mr Johnson to go.
I'd spent a lot of time campaigning in Wakefield, very struck by the level of disgust and discontent as people, I think, have seen through Boris Johnson and have lost confidence in the Conservatives doing the basic job of government now. And so it's our job in opposition until the next election to try and hold them to account and offer some of the plans that would make a difference, including on the cost of living, that we're just not seeing from the government itself.
The RMT union is refusing to rule out further strike action as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said today that the railway industry needs to move with the times. RMT boss Mick Lynch says rail workers would get a better deal if the government actually understood the work they do.
We're not going to name dates immediately, and we're going to continue working constructively with the companies to try and get a deal, but that is a really steep challenge at the moment, and it hurts our people because they've lost their wages. We don't want that to happen. So if Grant Shapps wants to be constructive, that's what he can do. It's up to him what his disposition is. I'll work with Grant Shapps or anyone else that's got something constructive to say in this dispute.
In the US, President Joe Biden has just signed a historic new gun safety bill into law. Lawmakers were able to reach a bipartisan deal following a string of recent mass shootings. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest buyers and increase funds for mental health and school safety programs. President Biden is praising this bill, even though he said it doesn't quite go far enough.
For the shootings that happen every day in the streets that are mass shootings we don't even hear about, the number of people killed every day in the streets. Their message to us was do something. I don't know how many times we heard that. Just do something. For God's sake, just do something. Well, today we did. While this bill doesn't do everything I want, it does include actions I've long called for that are going to save lives.
Staying with international news, and police say the deadly shooting overnight in Norway could be an act of Islamist terrorism. 2 people died and 14 others were seriously hurt at a nightclub in Oslo. Officers say a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin is in custody. The shooting happened just hours before the city's annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. Local militia say Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk have been ordered to withdraw from the eastern city. The retreat would leave most of Luhansk under Russian control. Earlier today, Boris Johnson said the economic consequences of Russia's war could force Ukraine to agree to a peace deal that's not in its best interests. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked Armed Forces Day by paying tribute to men and women, past and present, who've served both here and around the world. Kensington Palace marked the occasion by releasing 5 new images taken in November last year when Kate visited Pirbright Training Academy. Earlier, the HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. The Royal Navy aircraft carrier was the command ship for the drills. And Sir Paul McCartney will make history later when he becomes Glastonbury Festival's oldest ever solo headliner. The former Beatle will take to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. His set is expected to attract an especially large crowd with hits from throughout his career. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Here's what's coming up over the next hour, Toby Young from the Free Speech Union is going to join me to discuss why the police have been questioning one of the most famous comedians in the country, Joe Lycett, about a joke. I mean, come on, folks. Offence-seeking has become our national religion. And Neil Parish, the MP who resigned after admitting to watching pornography in Parliament, he's going to join me to discuss why his former seat has now been won by the Liberal Democrats in what has to be said was a crushing by-election defeat for the Tories. And could World Athletics follow swimming and ban biological males from elite women's competition? I'll speak to an expert campaigning for that change. That's what we're talking about over the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts though on Brexit this week. We marked 6 years since that vote. Would you still make the same choice you did in 2016? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. Loads of brilliant content and interaction on our GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, folks, Emma Thompson, she's back. The dame who took a first-class flight from Los Angeles to London to join an Extinction Rebellion demo. Remember her? I guess we knew she's not exactly self-aware, but this morning the millionaire Hollywood actress with houses in Italy and, of course, North London is in the news again, telling the British government to stop its latest attempt to control our increasingly lawless borders. A nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation. Those were the words of former US President Ronald Reagan. Like Emma, Ronnie was pro-immigration. He welcomed legal new arrivals, but recognised that a nation-state must be able to control its affairs and, at a minimum, control who's coming and who's going. Any self-respecting nation can't be leakier than a sieve. That's why, folks, the British people who voted in election after election for mostly the whole time I've been on this planet, folks, they voted for politicians that talk a good game about lowering the numbers of those coming here. And it's a core concern for voters even now. But we're still constantly let down. In 2016, polls showed immigration, 2015 and 2016, immigration was by far the most important issue for voters, way above the NHS and with twice as many people worried about it as they were the economy. Open borders with the European Union have ended and concern has fallen, but we've got to do more to keep that the case. The message of taking back control rang true for many because we're a country that, for many of us, has felt lost to unaccountable, liberal, international elites who are steadily pushing Europe and the rest of the world toward a borderless future. Now, a laudable attempt to fulfil the Brexit pledge is the government's Rwanda policy. It's common to hear the plan dismissed as a wedge issue or as a meaningless ploy to give red meat to voters by Boris Johnson's government. It isn't, folks. It's a legitimate policy to address a very real concern. The government is on the side of the popular democratic will of the British people. The elites, of course, are against it. Prince Charles himself, every bishop in the House of Lords, billionaire business moguls, lovies like Dame Emma Thompson and Olivia Colman, who in a new letter today have urged Commonwealth leaders to stand against Britain's quote-unquote offensive scheme. You hear that word more and more, don't you, folks? To send migrants to Rwanda. In this letter, they claim the policy, and I quote again, tells us much about the British government's colonial and insulting view of Africa as a place that is no better than a dumping ground for things, in this case people, it considers a problem. Who the hell do they think they are, right? Are they inviting the people that are coming over from Calais into their millionaire mansions? I don't think so. Firstly, right, they've slandered Rwanda, one of the most advanced nations in Africa, by implying it's some kind of prison. And we know that it's primarily men coming over here in dinghies from France. I repeat, from France. The land of baguettes, the land of cheese, the land of wine. Not a war-torn nation without rights, protections and democracy. Another of the signatories said it's an insult to Africa and it shames Britain. How can it be an insult to Africa when a democratic government signs a paid agreement that's beneficial to both parties without coercion, without that watchword of the moment, colonialism? It doesn't shame Britain. I tell you what shames Britain. The lack of housing in our country, the lack of ability to access a GP or a dentist, the lack of places at our nation's schools, the lack of support for our veterans and inability to help those already here in places like this in the Northeast, never mind in accepting all of the world's problems to come and make bed and board here. In 2016, during the Brexit debates, Emma Thompson described Britain as a tiny little cloud-bolted rainy corner of sort of Europe, a cake-filled, misery-laden, grey old island. Charming stuff, eh? The problems caused by mass migration don't impact celebrities like her, right? They don't care about us, they don't understand us, and they often don't care about the UK. But Boris, he needs to stand firm against people like her, against the cronies, against the bishops, against the European courts and the United Nations and their war of attrition against this policy. And ultimately, folks, stand up for the will of the British people. Now, folks, one of the nation's best-known TV comedians has been caught up in a police investigation because, folks, he told a joke. Cops asked Joe Lycett to fill in paperwork and answer questions about the quip from his stand-up set after an audience member on his tour complained. I mean, for God's sake, get a grip. Why on earth are our police investigating jokes and not knife crime or burglaries? What impact could this be having on free speech in the United Kingdom, supposedly a bastion of free expression? Joining me now to discuss this is the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and the comedian Patrick Monaghan. Hello, folks. Thank you very much for your company. Toby, can I start with you? The police investigating jokes. Now, as you well know, the Free Speech Union have helped me in the past when I was investigated for interviewing somebody and the comments that they made in a broadcast. The police seem to be moving in this direction in a really alarming rate, Toby. Is this hyperbole from me, or am I actually putting my finger on the pulse here?
I don't think it is hyperbole, unfortunately, Darren. We know from FOI requests that the police have recorded something like, and this is just in England and Wales, something like 250,000 non-crime hate incidents in the past 8 years or so, which is an average approaching 100 a day. And we're talking about, someone misgendering a trans activist on Twitter, that kind of level of misdemeanor. And the police literally describe them as non-crimes, but they spend time investigating them, and then they record them in a way that will show up if someone does an enhanced criminal record check in some circumstances and prevent you from getting a job working with vulnerable people. And the Free Speech Union has been lobbying against the recording and inclusion on national police databases of non-crime hate incidents now for about 2 years. And we're making some headway, but the police are still recording them. They're still wasting time, precious resources, investigating non-crimes. And the fact that they're doing this at a time when the rate of the rate at which they solve burglaries has never been lower. I mean, why aren't they policing our streets? Why are they wasting so much time policing our tweets? I suspect that's what happened in Joe Lycett's case. Someone complained that a joke he'd made was hateful and was motivated by hostility towards someone with a protected characteristic. So the police then investigated it, concluded that no crime had been committed, and I would have thought in this case they might well have recorded it as a non-crime hate incident. And the Free Speech Union has reached out to Joe Lycett. We've had some success in getting non-crime hate incidents deleted from people's records. And if he'd like our help, we can certainly have a go at deleting this one from his.
Well, absolutely, Toby. I would recommend Joe Lycett and any comedian get involved with the Free Speech Union. But Patrick, what do you actually think this is going to do for freedom of expression, for comedians being creative with their jokes and, dare I say, edgy and a bit on the edge of things? What I find funny might not be funny to someone who reads the Guardian newspaper, for example, Patrick.
Yeah, hiya, Darren. Yeah, basically, look, I mean, as you can probably see, I'm on the way to a tour show now. I'm outside of a police station hoping they come and arrest me. Because, look, the only thing is, all it's doing, look, as a comedian, all it's doing is just getting publicity, just getting more people to know about your show and your jokes. Look, as a stand-up, we all know this, or as anyone who does public speaking or any shows, you're not going to please 100% of people. You know, someone's always going to be offended, even if I did a joke about putting pineapple on my pizza, it's going to offend someone. Someone's going to ring up the police or whatever, you know, and that's something gentle. So it's like, at the end of the day, you've just got to look at it to think, if anything, Joe Lycett or anyone like this must be rubbing their hands together. They're thinking, look at the publicity he's created from this, you know, that someone would actually go and ring the police after a comedy show. I mean, I think the clue was in the title. You're at a comedy show. You know, that's the last thing you need to do is go to the police after it.
Well, exactly. But Patrick, I mean, you've got the likes of Rowan Atkinson coming out, right, and saying that actually there is a problem and that jokes will naturally offend someone, as you rightly say. So when you've got big figures like him coming out and say he's been in the national picture for longer than I've been on this planet, Patrick, do you actually worry that we're moving to a place where comedy is under threat like you wouldn't believe?
No, because listen, do you know what's going to happen? You're going to get these people who will come out all the time. They will complain about it. You're going to get, for every one person who's going to come out and do something ridiculous, like go to the police or do something ridiculous like that, you're going to get another 1,000 people who are going to come up against it and go, "Are you absolutely mad? Why would you do that?" You know what? Look, it's a show. You just if you were offended by that or you didn't like it, then don't buy a ticket to the show. Don't watch it on TV. Switch off. You know, we're in a land of opportunity now where there's a million things you can watch. There's a million things you can go and do. Time is limited. Don't waste your time going to watch something if you want to be offended. And then equally, don't waste that extra time then spending that time to try and complain about something that you weren't happy about in the first place. Just move on.
Yeah.
Get on with your life.
Well, get on with life. Life is short and precious, Patrick. I couldn't agree with you more. But Toby, coming back to you, I have been really, really quite disturbed by these stats from universities showing actually there is unequivocal support for refusing to platform people who may cause offence to particular student groups. That's gone up to 50% in 2022. That's really alarming to me, Toby, and it suggests that, you know, me, you, the Free Speech Union, anyone signed up to it, we might be heading for the gulags in the not too distant future.
Yeah, no, it's a really disturbing trend, Darren. Increasingly, university students, and not just university students, are placing emotional safety above free speech. And that means they don't want to hear anything that challenges them. They don't want to hear anything they find disagreeable, anything they find remotely offensive. They want to be banned. And, you know, it's all very well for Joe to say, for your other guest to say that, it doesn't really matter. It's probably quite good publicity. But actually, you know, for some people, being interviewed by the police about something they've said, even if it doesn't meet the threshold for criminal prosecution, can be really intimidating. And it does have a really chilling effect on free speech. And, you know, even under the present circumstances, the police feel licensed to investigate these sorts of vexatious complaints. But things are going to get a lot worse once the online safety bill becomes law, Darren. One of the features in the online safety bill is a new harmful communications offence, whereby if something you've said has caused someone extreme psychological distress, and if you don't have a decent excuse, you weren't participating in a debate, you weren't aware that it was going to cause them distress, you could go to jail for up to 2 years. This is a new law that's about to come into force via the online safety bill. It's buried in the small print. Not many people are aware of this, but it could, I think, have a really, in future, if someone claims to be extremely psychologically distressed by a joke they've heard a comedian make, I can see prosecutions taking place. I wouldn't rule it out.
Well, there we are, Toby. I mean, goodness only knows how long I'll be broadcasting this show for, I'll tell you that much. But Patrick, coming back to you there, Toby Young saying, well, actually, Patrick, I think it's much more serious than you suggest. But when you've got the comedian, and if you just be brief with your reply to this, if you would, Kevin Hart, for example, he's revealing that he's got a no cell phones policy at his latest tour. Does this not represent that there's a problem where, see, you big names like him are too scared to actually have people recording them for fear that it'll get leaked out and actually he'll have the coppers knocking at his door?
No, look, honestly, I think, look, we're about 30 years too late for this. If comics or anyone was ever going to be arrested for stuff like this, it would have happened in the 80s. I mean, the stuff then was more offensive than it is now. I mean, with Kevin Hart and comedians like that, they're doing it to, they want to make sure that their material is ready before it goes on a DVD. They don't want people to take sound bites of it and then put it out on social media to give their own opinions on it. So I think this cancel culture thing, I think, if anything, all it's doing is propelling comedians into a bigger limelight. I mean, with, like Joe, he's not a really offensive comedian at all. And more people now will probably go to his tour show and more people know about the routines because of just that silly complaint to a police station. I mean, no comedian's going to get arrested unless you're doing something ridiculous. I mean, you have to kill your audience member.
Toby, do you want to very briefly come back to that?
Well, there's a Scottish comedian called Count Dankula, who was indeed arrested and successfully prosecuted a few years ago for making what the Scottish authorities thought was an unacceptable joke about a Nazi pug. So, this isn't something in our distant past, and it's happened quite recently, and I think it's going to happen again unless we fight back, Darren.
Well, there we are. That was the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, giving his views. And before that, the comedian Patrick Monaghan. I thank the pair of them for their views. Plenty more to come this afternoon, folks, on Real Britain. But next up, we're going straight to a break. But after that, folks, I'll be hearing from GB News' London reporter who's been speaking to those businesses about the damage that's going on because of these strikes after this very short break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping it.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, airport workers, teachers and nurses have all this week threatened to take strike action. Pretty serious stuff. Meanwhile, the rail strikes, of course, continue to roll out. This is the third one that goes on today, marking the third day of strike action this week. Workers and commuters faced heavy disruption in the week, and the tourism industry in city centres is also taking a hit. We've actually just lost that guest there, so we'll go to that later, folks. But first of all, the Prime Minister's in Rwanda this week, where he has actually been defending his policy of sending illegal migrants to the East African nations to actually deter these dangerous crossings over the English Channel. Opponents have claimed the policy is immoral. But what is the accommodation being offered to the migrants actually like? Our political editor was in Rwanda yesterday to find out.
Well, the motto here at the Hope Hostel in Kigali is come as a guest, leave as a friend. This is, frankly, the accommodation that the British government hope that hundreds, thousands of failed migrants to the UK will end up here in Rwanda. But at the moment, there's no one in them. They're entirely empty. And that is because, of course, of those court rulings, which meant that those planes could not take off, which has meant that the government's policy is in peril. They insist, and the Prime Minister here in Rwanda is insistent, that he wants this plan to work, that it's a sensible plan, a plan that will act as a deterrent to stop people crossing the English Channel in those small boats. But it is also a costlier plan, a plan that's cost over £100 million to UK taxpayers. And the big question for the government is, can they make it work? But also a big question for us, given the questions that are being raised, given the comments by Prince Charles, who allegedly called this appalling, this policy, is what is the actual accommodation like? What are the areas, the facilities like for the migrants that may well end up here? So let's have a look inside. And so this is the main reception area inside the hostel. As you can see, these gentlemen here are going to check people in. And also what's notable, if you look at this, is that lots of the signs actually are on different languages, a recognition that if, and it is big if, migrants do arrive here, they will be from many different parts of the world. But there are 50 rooms in this complex, 2 people to a room. It could house up to 100 people. Let's have a look upstairs. The hostel is equipped with all sorts of stuff that you need for modern life, unsurprisingly. They've got internet rooms with laptops and computers that people access the internet, communal laundry spaces here, and also communal bathrooms that the migrants will be able to use. Well, there's lots of communal space here for the people who potentially move here, including prayer rooms. But we have to remember that the Labour Party have branded this as unworkable, but also as immoral, and a policy that they do not think should be happening. And we know also that there are many legal cases against all of this, and those cases, those legal proceedings, are likely to continue for the weeks and months to come. So as you can see, the facilities are pretty spacious, pretty airy. Frankly, they're quite smart in this complex, and we take you through to kind of show you what the rooms are like. As I say, the rooms are going to be shared ultimately, but you know, they are very tidy, they're very clean. There's a lot of space here, even for 2 people. And in the end, the government are hoping they're going to fill these rooms. And the Rwandans, it must be said themselves, are very proud of these facilities. And it's not just this complex, there are others on standby as well. But the big question, of course, for the government is ultimately, will people end up in these rooms? They've paid 120 million quid for them. The Rwandans tell us they've already received that money. They've already spent that money. The big question is, if they cannot get this policy to work, if those planes do not take off, will that money ultimately have been wasted for British taxpayers?
Hey, I don't know about you folks, but I fancy a look at Rwanda myself, if that's the accommodation. You're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, I'm going to be joined by Craig McKinley, Conservative MP for South Thanet, to discuss the by-election results. But now, folks, it's time for the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2:30. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister insists voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up as he defended his leadership after a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda this morning, Boris Johnson said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says the railway industry needs to move with the times as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. The RMT union is refusing to rule out further action. In the US, President Joe Biden has signed a historic new gun safety bill into law. Lawmakers were able to reach a bipartisan deal following a string of recent mass shootings. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest buyers and increases funds for mental health and school safety programs. President Biden is praising the bill, even though he says it doesn't go far enough. Police say the deadly shooting overnight in Norway could be an act of Islamist terrorism. 2 people died and 14 others were seriously hurt at a nightclub in Oslo. Officers say a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin is in custody. The shooting happened just hours before the city's annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are marking Armed Forces Day by paying tribute to men and women who have served. They released 5 new images taken last year when Kate visited Pirbright Training Academy. Earlier, HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's now 2:35 and you're with Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News. Now, folks, we're going to talk about this week's by-elections. Thursday was it has to be said, pretty bad night for the Tories in Wakefield and Tiverton and Honiton. So bad, in fact, that the Tory party chairman resigned. He's off. He's gone. So what next for the Conservative Party? Well, joining me to discuss this is the Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley. Craig, thank you very much for your company. This victory for the Lib Dems here in what was Neil Parish's old seat, your former colleague, is this just a protest vote, or do you think actually in seats like that, the Tories are in for one hell of a ride?
Well, I'm not going to gloss over the result. It was a very bad result. It was the biggest swing that we've seen, even bigger than the one when Owen Paterson stood down. What do we read out of these things? Poor turnout, nothing like a turnout you'd see at a general election. I think if you really want my honest opinion as to why those seats went so badly, was the nature of why the previous MPs left. And when MPs leave under a cloud, I mean, Wakefield, a very serious cloud, the MP convicted of a sexual offence against a minor and now doing time for it, that's a very, very bad place to be starting an election campaign. And then Neil Parish in Honiton and Tiverton, again, a fairly lurid story that doesn't go down well with voters who really don't like by-elections. They want terms to continue and then to make their choice at general elections. But all in all, incumbent parties never do very well at by-elections. I'm not going to gloss over that there's reason for this and reason for that. But in Wakefield, which was a very strong, red wall seat from years ago, Conservatives hadn't held it for 80-odd years, not entirely unexpected, but not the type of big swings that you'd expect and need Labour to make if they're going to have any chance of winning a general election. But in those Lib Dem facing seats, there's going to be some worry about that. Of course there will be. And there was always, in times of old, a traditional Liberal vote. That was a Liberal vote. It wasn't a Lib Dem vote, but it seems to have gone over to the Lib Dems as the potential challenger party. But what is really bizarre, Darren, is that in both of those seats, very much Leave seats, people have selected, I know on poor turnouts, parties that are completely contra to that very big constitutional and democratic decision. I mean, in Wakefield, they've reselected a Labour MP. And let's not forget what Keir Starmer was doing during that parliamentary period between 16 and 19. He was doing everything he could to frustrate that Brexit referendum. And then, obviously, Ed Davey and the Lib Dems. Nobody really knows what they stand for anymore, but one thing I do know what they stand for, they don't like Brexit and will do everything they possibly can to water that down. So for the electors to go to them is a slightly bizarre event, but of course there's a lot of annoyance about a number of things. Cost of living, did that play a part? But, frankly, can the Labour Party or the Lib Dems do anything about cost of living? I know one answer to that, absolutely not.
But if you consider, Craig, right, and this is a topic that we've discussed many times before, if you consider that every party is trying to out-green every other party, right, you've got Boris Johnson becoming almost a seer of net zero, right? He's so whackery and wokery have become his creed when it comes to green and environmental issues. Who do voters actually go to now if you want actually to see a more sensible energy policy? If you don't want to see us dependent on unreliable forms of energy production, for example, if you don't want to have to go without your car on a weekend, because that's the future we're heading for under Boris Johnson, isn't it, Craig?
Well, I'd say that's definitely a future you're heading for under the Labour or the Lib Dems. Yet the Conservative Party have been very enthusiastic under this Prime Minister about those things. I mean, not least when you've got the COP26 chain round your neck, you tend to be playing a game of poker and outplaying everybody else. That I don't think is very helpful. But I get the feeling we're starting to see a little bit more common sense coming in, not least because of the influence and strength of my net zero scrutiny group, which is growing in influence, I think, and common sense amongst the public. And funny enough, I've just been out and about in my constituency the last couple of days. I've had more people come up and want to shake my hand on the basis of my net zero campaign than I've ever seen before. I'm expecting, so we're led to believe by much of the mainstream media, media that everybody's hostile to the Conservatives and their MPs. I found nothing like it. People were really enthusiastic about, my common sense approach to net zero, very worried about the cost of living. But we do have levers in our hand as the Conservative Party and the Chancellor in particular. I hope we're going to see that, probably will at the autumn budget. But where things have been inflated in price and there is a huge tax attached to it, we have that lever to reduce them. And those levers should be reducing the price of pump fuel by doing something, either reducing VAT or reducing the fuel duty further. Because the reality is, Darren, and you'll know this very well, the Chancellor said, I've given away 5 billion, which was the value of that 5 pence cut in fuel duty. But as prices have risen, all of it, including the fuel duty, has VAT attached to it. The tax take back to the Treasury is exactly the same as where it was before. So if he wanted to give 5 billion away, he hasn't because he's got it back in VAT, then let's start giving that away again. He planned for it, he budgeted for it, thought it was achievable, let's do it. But then we can move on to energy prices.
Craig, that's exactly the point, isn't it?
Levies.
Yeah, that's
I think we've got
exactly
the environmental levies, which is a fair percentage of our bills. You shouldn't be inflating bills when we got the levers in our hand to reduce them. I mean, there's argument about, grain. Grain is going to be a big issue. We shouldn't underestimate that.
Of course.
Because of the breadbasket of Russia and the Ukraine. There is no duty on wheat. There's no VAT on bread. So there's not that much we can do about that. But on other things where there is a big tax charge, we can and we should, and quite frankly, we must.
Yes, but why have you got such confidence in Boris being your man? And I get sick of the attempts to outdo Boris, and the media like to bash him because of Brexit, as you well know, Craig. But the government have said, for example, they're going to wind back their ambitions on biofuel and focus instead on food production. That strikes me as eminently sensible, right? And also on moves to actually, they keep saying they're going to cut taxes. They keep saying they're going to get rid of some civil servants, which are in totally unnecessary jobs. They could start with the diversity portfolio, if you ask me, Craig. And all of these things sound really laudable, but they had an 80-seat majority, Craig. They haven't been using it. Wouldn't you agree with that?
No, I would. Obviously, the COVID period was a very strange period, and perhaps they could have used that time to have actually promoted some of the Brexit freedoms, the Brexit dividends that I would very much be looking for. And yes, I appreciate very much we have not been using those Brexit opportunities that only come once in a generation, and a big majority that we could actually do stuff with. There's lots of Conservative policies that I am promoting all of the time, and that's low tax, traditional conservatism, get the state out of my hair. That's the, that's the message. But do you know what is really bizarre? When people say, you can't, it'll be austerity if we, cut civil servants and all the rest of it. Do you know what all I'm looking for is to get back to the size of the state under Gordon Brown, would you believe? Because we've expanded, we've had 91,000 new civil servants, a lot of it blamed on the Brexit and the COVID period. Well, that's fine. They've got to go. We've got to get that state back into shape. We've got to start stopping some of this wokery, which I'd be on the same page as you on that one, Darren, and get back to what government should do. That's providing services without the frippery, and pare that down as much as we can, because every one of those is paid for by a productive business paying tax.
Craig, in a word, if you would, I'm going to ask you to play the role of Mystic Meg for us. Are they going to win back these seats come the general election?
I think there's every opportunity to do so, but realistically, a unique alignment of the planets in 2019. Even with the best will, I don't expect we'll do quite as well again, but we can have a very good majority by putting the proper policies forward, showing that we care, and being Conservative again. Let's not be frightened of that.
Well, we'll see. That was the Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley. Thank you very much for your time today. Now, folks, it's Armed Forces Day today, when the nation commemorates the men and women who've served their country in the armed forces. It'll be celebrated up and down the country over the course of this weekend, with major fairs returning to places like Cleethorpes for the first time in 2 years. After, of course, the pandemic, towns like Scarborough too are hosting their biggest event on the calendar for decades. Joining me now to discuss this is the Conservative MP, Colonel Bob Stewart. Colonel Bob, thank you very much for your time. How important is Armed Forces Day? Do you think actually we give it as much attention as we should as a nation?
We're giving it more attention than we've ever given it, to be honest, because we've actually introduced it. It's got bigger and bigger. Well, yeah, I think it's doing well. I think Armed Forces Day is an important day, and I think the Armed Forces benefit and like having it.
So the past 2 years, of course, as I say, because of the pandemic, they've actually cancelled the celebrations. Do you think now there'll be further to get out there and really, I guess, show their respect for our troops who selflessly go out there, put their lives at risks to fight for British interest and British safety?
Well, I think it's a very good thing because the public are reminded the armed forces do go out there, run risks on their behalf. And actually, I think the armed forces like it. Although, to be honest, sometimes when you get these sort of orders to go out and parade through towns, you sometimes think, is this necessary? And then when you do it and you see the response from the public, you say, yes, it was worth it.
Do you think we're taking, is your party, as a Conservative party, and of course the government, is it taking the armed forces seriously enough? We had Lord West on this show not too long ago, and he was arguing that actually we wouldn't be able to fight a sustained war as they're doing in Ukraine. You know, we just don't have the manpower or, frankly, the firepower.
Well, in that case, I agree with Lord West. We've cut our army, in particular, by far too much, and I'm against that. I'm still a Conservative, but I'm against actually cutting the armed forces because fundamentally, you can't. The classic thing is you can't actually hold ground with the Air Force or the Navy. You've actually got to put soldiers on the ground to hold it. And right now, our army is too small. And all three services actually have a problem with equipment. We actually require to have more money spent on our equipment, and some of the equipment is quite old.
Well, indeed. Bob, I want to ask you, a lot of my viewers get in touch with me and they say things like, well, Bob, it's all well and good for you to talk about respecting our armed forces and actually putting more money and investment into them. I couldn't agree with you more. I think most of my viewers will be in complete alignment with you on that. But a lot of people see people, for example, coming over the English Channel in these unseaworthy vessels, getting put up in 5-star, 4-star hotels, given bed and board and all the rest of it, when actually our veterans, some of them may well be homeless and in dire straits, Bob. Do you think we're doing enough, actually? Is there enough of a balance to actually protect and cater for those that have served this country?
We can never do enough, to be honest. There are many stories about people being on the streets, but every time I see someone on the streets who claims to be member of the armed forces, I approach them myself and I say, so you're on the streets. Why are you on the streets? Because if you go straight to the local authority, they're going to put you up. And I often find that they just don't want to do that for various reasons. It's really sad. And I say, come on, you've been in the armed forces. Go and declare yourself and give me your name and I'll, take you to one of the service charities and you'll be looked after. But sometimes, surprisingly, people don't want that. You can't take a horse to water and make it drink if they don't want to do it. And that may be for many reasons. Principally,
well, indeed, pride.
People may not be in a very good mental state. I don't know, but that's what they say. And you can't force people.
We've got to do more. We've got to do more. I think we need to build more houses as a point of urgency, to be quite honest with you. But we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. That was the Conservative MP, Colonel Bob Stewart, on our armed forces. Couldn't agree with him more. Now, folks, rail workers aren't the only public sector workers that are threatening further strike action, with teachers from the National Education Union, the largest teaching union in the country, warning that they will go on strike if they fail to receive an inflation-busting pay rise. Nadeem Zahawi, the Education Secretary, said a teacher strike would be unforgivable, especially as, of course, as kids are doing their exams. So should teachers join the strike? Joining me now to discuss this is history and politics student at Reading University, Steele Halliard-Bennett, and Matt Rogan, a computer science student at the University of York. Now, I'm going to start with you, Steve. Should teachers actually go on strike at a time when, of course, kids have really suffered, and we're hearing all sorts of stories about children being unable to read and write, to even speak and communicate? Is it right for them to go on strike at this time?
No, it's not. If we look at how much teachers are actually getting paid right now, the average is £32,000. Now, no, it's not loads, but it's more than enough. And, teachers tend to get pay rises incredibly quickly in the teaching profession, and they can go up to about 70 grand. So, these people, as much as I know, we are all going through very difficult times right now with the financial situation, especially with inflation. But, they're not on the poverty line. And at the end of the day, there are professions and people that I think, if we are going to have pay rises, I think deserve it far, far more than some of the teachers. And as far as, we've just come through a pandemic where a lot of children didn't get the education that they deserved, for a multitude of different reasons. And for me to then now do this would, yes, 100%
I agree.
Be completely unforgivable.
Matt Rogan, you're at the University of York. Why do you disagree with that, if of course you do?
Well, I absolutely back a strike from teachers because, as we've said, we've had a pandemic over the last 2 years. Teachers have been the absolute backbone of education, delivering lessons to students, and the best that we can do for them is give them a pay rise in a cost of living crisis. And that's what it is. It's a crisis, meaning it's urgent, needed. Education, as I know from being a tutor myself, it's a continuous thing. People continue learning. Students can catch up learning if they're affected by a teaching strike, but for the teachers who are facing this crisis where they won't have enough money to pay the bills, they won't have enough money to pay the rent, they can't exactly catch up later in the future if they don't have the money. So the least we can do is give them what they deserve after being heroes and key workers in the pandemic, give them a pay rise so that they can keep up with inflation.
But Matt, I'm sorry, with respect, I think that's a load of tosh. A lot of people, key workers in, for example, supermarkets, were working round the clock to actually ensure that we could get food during the pandemic. Teachers, some of them didn't even give online lessons, right? It's just a hogwash to suggest that all teachers are some kind of martyr.
Well, Darren, I would like to challenge that. My mother is watching at the moment. She's a teacher, and I think she was an absolute key worker and a hero. And she did deliver throughout the pandemic. And she, even outside of a pandemic scenario, has given her absolute all, dealing with massive workloads, a lot of stress coming onto the job. And what I'd like to ask you, Darren, is, are you yourself, well, I'm probably not a teacher yourself, but do you know teachers yourself who go through this workload and have to deal with, quite honestly, a lot? That's my question to you. Do you personally know someone who is a teacher?
This is my show, thank you very much, but my mother actually is a teaching assistant and she's not getting an inflation-busting pay rise, I'll tell you that much for free. But Steve, coming back to you, the trade unions, the power that they exact over everything from the economy, we're seeing that on the railways, to our children's educations, it's clearly quite strong. I'm of the view that we need to actually curtail the power of those to actually bring our country to a standstill. What's your view?
Well, Thatcher had the right idea, didn't she, on that regard? A lot of people criticised her at the time, but I think we're all seeing that again now. And going back on that point, I think, we talked about teachers having a pay rise because they did fantastic work. Teachers actually had a pay rise in 2020. Gavin Williamson, there was a report asking several recommendations. What would teachers like? The government granted all of them, one of which being a 5.5% pay rise. So they got a pay rise. And then along with that, the government is actually going to put £7 billion in a time of crisis right now. That's a lot of money. £7 billion into education over the next 5 years. £4 billion of that coming this year and next year. So, this idea that teachers are critically underpaid and are being ignored and thrown by the wayside is completely incorrect. And quite frankly, I think the government, the government, I think one of the issues we're in right now is the government has handed out far too much money.
Matt, just to finish, I'm wondering then, whose taxes would you increase in order to actually fund and cost this pay increase?
Well, personally, I'd increase taxes on the super rich because they're the ones who, they're holding the money. They should be contributing more. But going back to, like we said, this is all about teachers.
Well, hang on. No, Matt, on that point. So what would you do then if the super rich leave the country because of the fact that you've just hiked their taxes and we're not competitive on the global marketplace anymore?
Well, your question to me, Darren, was who would I increase the taxes on? I've given you my answer. So,
well, there we are. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. But that was the history and politics student, Halyard Bennett, and computer science student, Matt Rogan. Thank you for your time. Now, folks, you're watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Lots more still to come in the next hour. Do stay with us. But first, let's take a little look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be breezy and unsettled with showers for northern and western areas. Let's look at the details. Showers across southwest England will continue to move through quite quickly, so there will be some late sunny spells. However, it'll feel quite fresh with a strong southwesterly breeze. In southeast England, it'll be a dry evening with sunny spells coming and going, feeling relatively fresh here too with a strengthening breeze. In South Wales, heavy showers will push northeastwards throughout the evening, feeling quite cool exposed to the brisk westerly breeze and during any showers. In the Midlands, it will turn a little bit drier into this evening as showers move away to the north, so a mix of cloudy and clear spells and still the risk of the odd shower too. In northeast England, after a relatively dry day, cloud cover will increase for some with a risk of showers into the evening. Windy at the coast with gusts of 30 miles per hour. Southern Scotland will see sunshine and showers this evening as well, feeling cool whilst raining, but it will dry up quickly once they clear and the sun comes out once again. It'll be a very windy evening for the time of year in Northern Ireland. More persistent rain will continue in the west, whilst the east will see some sunny spells. Overnight it will remain clear in the east, but further west it'll turn much wetter again and the winds will pick up too. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. In this hour, we'll be discussing the UK's new trade talks with Saudi Arabia, the latest threats to free speech at university, and much, much more. But first, it's news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's coming up to 1 minute past 3. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has defended his leadership by claiming voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up. It follows a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, the Prime Minister said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Well, that's the Prime Minister's view. Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey told GB News the public does want Mr Johnson to resign.
I'd spent a lot of time campaigning in Wakefield, very struck by the level of disgust and discontent as people, I think, have seen through Boris Johnson and have lost confidence in the Conservatives doing the basic job of government now. And so it's our job in opposition until the next election to try and hold them to account and offer some of the plans that would make a difference, including on the cost of living, that we're just not seeing from the government itself.
Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says the railway industry needs to move with the times as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. RMT boss Mick Lynch says rail workers would get a better deal if the government actually understood the work they do.
We're not going to name dates immediately. And we're going to continue working constructively with the companies to try and get a deal. But that is a really steep challenge at the moment. And it hurts our people because they've lost their wages. We don't want that to happen. So if Grant Shapps wants to be constructive, that's what he can do. It's up to him what his disposition is. I'll work with Grant Shapps or anyone else that's got something constructive to say in this dispute.
In the US, President Joe Biden has just signed a historic new gun safety bill into law. Republicans and Democrats were able to agree a deal following a string of recent mass shootings. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest gun buyers and increases funding to mental health and school safety programs. President Biden is praising this bill, even though he admits it doesn't go far enough.
For the shootings that happen every day in the streets that are mass shootings we don't even hear about, the number of people killed every day in the streets. Their message to us was do something. I don't know how many times we heard that. Just do something. For God's sake, just do something. Well, today we did. While this bill doesn't do everything I want, it does include actions I've long called for that are going to save lives.
Police say the deadly shooting overnight in Norway could be an act of Islamist terrorism. 2 people died and 14 others were seriously hurt at a nightclub in Oslo. Officers say a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin is now in custody. The shooting happened just hours before the city's annual Pride Parade, which was cancelled. Local militia say Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk have been ordered to withdraw from the eastern Ukrainian city. The retreat would leave most of Luhansk under Russian control. Earlier today, Boris Johnson said the economic consequences of Russia's war could force Ukraine to agree to a peace deal that's not actually in its interests. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked Armed Forces Day by paying tribute to the men and women, past and present, who've served both here in the UK and around the world. Kensington Palace marked the occasion by releasing 5 new images taken in November last year when Kate visited Pirbright Training Academy. Earlier, HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. The Royal Navy aircraft carrier was the command ship for the drills. So Paul McCartney will make history later when he becomes Glastonbury Festival's oldest ever solo headliner. The former Beatle will take to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. His set is expected to attract an especially large crowd with hits from throughout his year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show. Should the UK be pursuing a trade deal with Saudi Arabia? And what are we to make of their human rights record? Also, why is the number of students who back safe spaces and who ban political opponents from campuses absolutely surging? What does that mean for free speech? And nominations for the North East Tourism Awards are open, the greatest region in the whole of the British Isles, where I am right now. I'm going to be speaking to a former winner of the awards to find out what it's all about. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As always, though, I would absolutely love to know your thoughts on Brexit 6 years after that vote. Would you still vote to leave? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online on YouTube and don't forget Facebook. Loads of brilliant content on our page. Cheers very much. Now, this week, folks, the government announced Britain will launch talks on a free trade agreement with 6 Gulf states: Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. A new opportunity to boost wealth and grow non-EU ties post-Brexit. Or, folks, a misguided move that would ignore human rights abuses in the region. Well, joining me to discuss this is Peter Tatchell, a human rights activist. Now, Peter, can I ask you, these sort of agreements, they manage to really boost trade and enterprise and actually make us all richer and boost jobs and all the rest of it. Why shouldn't we look to sign agreements with someone like Saudi Arabia, for example?
Well, of course, trade deals, especially when they involve job creation, are very, very welcome. But we have to balance that against, I believe, the human rights record of the countries that we trade with. I don't think we should be giving countries a blank check. And in the case of the 6 Gulf countries, all are dictatorships, all are serial human rights abusers, and all have persecuted their own citizens. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, it is currently waging war in Yemen with arms supplied by the UK, even though we are supplying these arms, even though it is on the record that Saudi Arabia has bombed civilian targets indiscriminately and killed many innocent people. Now, I just think it is very wrong for us to trade with a regime that is engaged in a war involving war crimes against Yemeni people. You know, we deplore Russian war crimes in Ukraine. We have to be consistent and deplore Saudi war crimes in Yemen.
Yes, so Peter, then, is it your view that ultimately we can learn from the German example, who became overly dependent on Russia? That's another country that you have campaigned around, Peter. Do you actually think we can learn from the German example and not get too dependent on states with who we do not share values with?
I think we have to wean ourselves off those states where there are serious human rights abuses. For example, in Saudi Arabia, as well as the war in Yemen, there are at least 30 political prisoners. And right across all these 6 states, there's no equality for women. Women are subjected to draconian restrictions on their movements and lives. There's no right to form and free trade unions. So people in those countries are subjected to quite draconian labor laws, and they have no right and no redress against that. In Qatar, as we know, since that country was given the right to host the World Cup, over 6,500 migrant workers have died. 6,500. It is such a shocking example. And I just think we need to find other countries that will, do deals with us, but also respect human rights. And in the interim, pressure these 6 Gulf countries to clean up their act. We need to say, look, we will trade with you, but you have to release political prisoners. You do have to end the persecution of sexual, ethnic, and religious minorities within your own country.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Victoria Hewson now from the Institute of Economic Affairs. She's head of regulatory affairs at the Institute. Victoria, can I just ask you then, Peter's made the case there that actually we should not be doing deals with these nations around the globe, like Russia, like the Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, that are guilty of human rights abuses and do not share the values that we do in this country.
Well, what I would say is that the point of trade agreements is to remove barriers to trade so that people and businesses can trade across those countries if they doesn't make it compulsory. So it really does not mean that you will be obliged to trade with people in Saudi Arabia if you find that to be unethical. So it's.
We just lost Victoria there, but you get the point, Peter, right? That actually what Victoria is saying is that you aren't compelled to do business with Saudi Arabia just because there's a trade agreement in place, and that ultimately perhaps we are going to need to have some kind of bilateral relationship with an important member of the Middle East.
Well, you're right that the trade deal won't automatically result in trade, but it will facilitate it. It will make it possible, more likely, and that will be to the benefit of us, but also to the benefit of the Saudis. And if we carry on with business as usual, we are sending a signal to the Saudis and the other Gulf states that we don't really care about what they do to their own citizens, or in the case of Saudi Arabia, what they're doing to the people in Yemen with their bombing campaign. And that, I think, is so wrong. We as a democracy need to be leading by example, showing the world that we have human rights values, which, of course, all these Gulf countries have actually signed up to. They've signed up to the human rights international agreements, but they're not following them. I just don't think we should go along with them regardless.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think there's any real suggestion that we'd go along with them and go against human rights. But can I ask you about football in the context of football? There's a lot of sort of political posturing. They're wearing rainbow laces and all of these other things, when actually, if you look at Man City, they're a UAE sports-owned group. If you look at Newcastle United now, Saudi Arabia, are football, and of course the fact that the World Cup is in Qatar, are football guilty, Peter, in your view, of giving it all LGBT pride and equality and all the rest of it here in this country, but when it comes to their deals with nations abroad, being guilty of rank hypocrisy?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It is rank hypocrisy. It is double standards. And I think it brings great disrepute to football when, on the one hand, they very laudably and commendably support LGBT plus inclusion in football, but on the other hand, do deals with regimes and people from regimes who do the exact opposite. We have to remember that in most of these Middle East countries, LGBT plus people, and many others, by the way, can be imprisoned and jailed for a long time, often tortured, and in some cases put to death. Saudi Arabia has the death penalty for homosexuality, and gay people can be beheaded by a sword for simply loving a person of the same sex, for having a sexual relationship with them. I just think it is so wrong that football speaks, pro-LGBT on the one hand, but then does deal with these grotesque human rights abusing regimes. And it's not just about LGBT, it's about women as well. In Qatar, for example, women have to get the permission of a male guardian to marry, to study, and to travel. I mean, they are chattels of men. This is just unconscionable in the 21st century, and it's much the same for all these Gulf countries.
They might well point at our country and say, well, look at what you're doing on Julian Assange. And I don't know your view, but I'm assuming that you might think that they've got a point.
Well, I do, but, two wrongs do not make a right. We have to improve our standards. So in the case of Julian Assange, to defend a whistleblower, he was a whistleblower who told the truth. He exposed American war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was a laudable, commendable thing to do. He should not be extradited to the United States. But the fact that our Home Secretary has agreed to do that doesn't make anything that Saudi does right as well. Human rights abuses, wherever they take place, we have to take a stand against them, including here at home as well as in the Middle East.
That was Peter Tatchell there, and before that, Victoria Hewson, who we sadly lost. But folks, coming up now, we're going to be discussing, as we mentioned earlier, today's Armed Forces Day. More than 150 events are taking place across the country, beautiful to see, including the national celebration in Scarborough. Earlier in the week, though, one community in Nottinghamshire cheered on troops based locally at a very special ceremony. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has more.
Each step through Eastwood and the crowd calls out louder. The town's support for the British Army shown through strength in numbers. The parading troops, 170 Infrastructure Support Engineer Group, live here too, at nearby Chetwynd Barracks. The group's members served in Afghanistan and are serving elsewhere right now. Colonel Hatcher is its commander.
6-2, 6-3, 6-6 Works Group, alongside the group's headquarters and support squadron, are on parade here today, representing the 200 or so officers and soldiers who are currently deployed both in the UK and overseas in support of training operations and other defence activity.
In 2009, the troops were granted freedom of entry into Broxtowe Borough, a medieval tradition of trust and a huge civic honour. The perfect reason to parade during Armed Forces Week.
I'm so proud of them because we don't get the opportunity to connect with the public and where we live very frequently, so it's great to be able to do this. We did a parade a couple of weeks ago in Derby for the Queen's Jubilee, and then to do this in the middle of Armed Forces Week, it's been absolutely perfect.
Armed Forces Day and the wider week means that communities can celebrate the serving men, women and veterans that form the British Army, Navy and Air Force. But it's about their families too. Back in Eastwood, Sabina arrived early before the pavement packed out.
My husband and I have been together for 19 years, married for 15, and this is the very first time I'm ever going to see him march. So just trying to contain myself because I'm a little bit excited.
Well, it means everything, doesn't it, to see our soldiers. We don't see a lot of them in Eastwood, and I've got 3 sons and none of them are in uniform, and I desperately wanted them to be.
Broxtowe's MP Darren Henry served in the Air Force.
When you're serving, you're very aware that you're there to do your duty for your country, and 170 Engineer Group came back from Afghanistan last year, for example, so we're very proud of that. But what's important about a day like today is that you express your connectivity with the community.
For Councillor Ridgelovic, leading his community means keeping it connected to the forces that share these streets.
They are able, therefore, to come out, show their support for the armed forces, for the job that they do in protecting our freedom, our culture and our heritage. We are immensely proud.
The war in Ukraine has shown Britain's armed forces still have strong ties internationally, but on Armed Forces Day, the connection isn't lost locally either. Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Beautiful package there from Will Hollis. But folks, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we're going to be discussing a new poll showing that, a really frightening poll, frankly, showing students are even more against free speech than ever before. But first, let's have a check on the weather.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, a new survey released this week has revealed the percentage of students that want more restrictions on free speech and an increase in these so-called safe spaces, get a grip, on campus has actually been surging. The Higher Education Policy Institute asked 1,000 full-time undergraduates for their views. Nearly 80%, I repeat, 80% of respondents believed that students who felt threatened should always have their demands for safety respected. That's up from 68% in 2016. 1 in 10 said conservative societies should be banned from campus altogether. Well, joining me to discuss this is Professor of International Relations, Doug Stokes. Doug, I just want to ask you, the stats there about banning the conservative societies at universities, I hear time and again about societies like that at unis that issue invitations to MPs, let's not forget the Conservative Party secured 14 million votes in 2019. They'll issue an invitation and they'll have the invitation accepted, but the student union will be forced to cancel the event because of pressure from student groups that want to cancel debate and speech on campus. This is really serious stuff when kids can't hear from democratically elected politicians, isn't it, Doug?
It is serious, and I mean, and it's serious because ultimately universities exist as places where we want minds to grow. And I'm a great believer in, pressure makes diamonds and steel sharpens steel. And what that basically means is when you go to university, you go as a young person and you have to have respect and, anti-discrimination, all those fantastic values. But you must be ultimately exposed to a critical environment with a very strong diversity of opinions. And by doing that, you make the very important transition from being a young person, often go at 19 or 18, 19 years old, into being more of an adult. And so that does involve exposure to ideas that may make you feel uncomfortable and push you outside of your comfort zone. And that is absolutely crucial to our society, to our culture, to our economy, and to businesses and to life in general. You need to sort of grow and you have to be exposed to a wide variety of opinion. And as you say, I mean, if you have this kind of cotton wool therapeutic paternalism where students are being protected from wrong ideas or kind of bad ideas that may hurt their feelings, they're not ultimately going to grow as people, as humans, as adults. Essentially, they're going to stay in a kind of an infantile state. And that's very sad. That's very sad for us as a civilization and as a culture.
Surely you would actually expect the students of today who view themselves as being quite enlightened and progressive, surely they would recognise the merits of free speech, especially as we look around the world and have them beamed into our homes like never before, examples of countries that don't have access to freedom of expression.
Well, I entirely agree. And I mean, unfortunately, the way this is often framed is that free speech is in some way stands in opposition to sort of, if you look at the HEPI report you just mentioned, for example, it says that they frame it in the way where free speech stands in opposition to discrimination. So students would prefer people to have their free speech rights infringed and basically cancelled to protect students from discrimination. But the fact is that if you think about it, I mean, just go back to the 19th century. Frederick Douglass, he was born a slave, one of the giants, African-American giant, intellectual giants. This man was born a slave, escaped from slavery, became an incredible intellectual. And any movement that's pushing forward, ultimately the progression of our common humanity, the keystone for that is freedom of speech, is freedom of thought. Frederick Douglass said, liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts cease to exist. So free speech and academic freedom and free speech are really the foundation stone for anti-discrimination, for our common humanity. And if those things go, then we are in a very, very dangerous space. And I say that because, this... Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, Doug. But what do you think the solution is then? Because the government are saying that they're going to put through legislation, laudable sounding legislation, that purports to actually tackle this issue and put a duty on universities to actually protect freedom of expression and students' right to it. Do you think that's the solution? Is it more legislation that's the solution? Or is it more fundamental than that? Is it actually about tackling the values of the next generation?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't put the blame on the students here, right? I mean, that ultimately they're young people, and I think that they're not the ones to blame. What I do think has happened is there's been a total moral collapse of leadership across British institutions in general, including university leadership. Essentially, what should be the ultimate apex of our triangular civilizational. It should be ultimately freedom of speech, liberty. Those kinds of values should be the absolute foundation stone of our universities. And instead, what we've actually now got is this creeping therapeutic paternalism. So when you hear these ideas like, like snowflakes and cancel culture and these ultimately come from a culture that has emerged very strongly, especially over the last 10 years in British university systems, where university leadership teams no longer value what are the foundation stones of our incredible university system. But now it's more about therapeutic paternalism, making people feel good, self-esteem, being nice to people. And the thing is, this is another really important point, right? We are now seeing economic shifts in the global economy away from the West to a rising China, etc. Do you really think the Chinese are mollycoddling and creating these kind of cotton wool? No. Those aren't ultimately the values that progress civilization. We have to have equality of opportunity, hard work, self-discipline, and those are the things that ultimately make adults. If you mollycoddle and wrap them in this cotton wool, this patronizing mollycoddle culture that we seem now to have across British institutions, and including our university systems, if you do that, you are ultimately betraying the future of this country. So, to come back to your point about the legislation, my preference isn't state intervention, but unfortunately, the rot has gone so deep. That's where we now need to go. Unfortunately,
absolutely.
And so, I think it's a fantastic thing what the government are doing. I think that the DfE and those working in the DfE should be commended. I think the government should be commended for what it's doing with academic freedom legislation. I say state intervention isn't my preference, but it should be bottom up, but it's not. Unfortunately, the rot has got so deep, and essentially what it's going to create is create an office, a director of academic freedom director in the OFS, which is the Office for Students, which governs our UK universities, who basically will have a team under him or her to make sure that these precious civilizational values are protected.
I hope it works.
In our centres of learning.
Absolutely. I hope it works, Doug. But I tell you what, if I could clone you and send you around every university and even on these Mickey Mouse degrees that some kids are taking these days, I would do it in a heartbeat. But we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. That was Doug Stokes there, Professor of International Relations. But now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we're going to be discussing the fact that World Swimming has a new transgender policy protecting the women's elite competition from male-bodied transgender people taking part. But before we get on to that, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Darren, thank you. Good afternoon to you. The top stories on GB News. Boris Johnson has been defending his leadership, claiming voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up, following a double by-election defeat for the Tories. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda this morning, the Prime Minister said the public wants to hear more about the real issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says the railway industry needs to move with the times as the third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. 20% of train services are still running today as thousands of RMT union members protest over jobs, pay and conditions. The RMT union is refusing to rule out further action. In the United States, President Joe Biden has signed a historic new gun safety bill into law. Lawmakers were able to reach a bipartisan deal following a string of recent mass shootings in America. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest buyers of weapons and increases funds for mental health and school safety programmes. Here, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are marking Armed Forces Day today by paying tribute to men and women who've served for their country. They released 5 new images taken last year when Kate visited Purbright near Aldershot. Earlier, HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the coast of Spain. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You are with GB News. Don't go anywhere. Darren is back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, to sport. And the World Athletics president, Sebastian Coe, has actually praised swimming's decision to ban transgender women from elite female competitions, as it is, quote unquote, in the best interests of its sport, and hinted that track and field could soon follow suit. International Rugby League, the Scottish Football Association, and many others are following suit themselves. So is sport coming to its senses? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Senior Lecturer in Philosophy, Ethics and Metaphysics in Sports, Dr. John Pike. Dr. Pike, thank you very much for your time. Why are governing bodies and sporting organisations doing this now? Why have they felt that now is the time to actually take these stances and make them known?
Yes, I think it's been because of some high-profile cases. The case of Leah Thomas in swimming in the US, and the situation with Emma Bridges here, or rather there in the UK. And what pushed the UCI, I think, was a threat of boycott action by GB women cyclists, who really, it seems to me, thought enough is enough. And it was then them taking a stand that accelerated the process. And once the voice of women athletes, and in this case some very brave, I think, women athletes, became heard, then I think that pushed the momentum on to getting some decent policy decisions being made.
Yes, I mean, in the case of Leah Thomas, I mean, looking at the imagery, it does just, and for my radio listeners, we're just going to show some footage of Leah Thomas. It does look like Leah Thomas would naturally, having gone through male puberty, have a natural advantage to her competitors who have no doubt worked their entire lives to get to such lofty heights of the elite of their sport? Is there a real fundamental unfair advantage there?
There's an unfair advantage for male athletes in female sport. Now, you need all the bits of that sentence together. So if we had mixed sport, and in some areas we do, like equestrianism, obviously it's the horse that's doing the work. So there's no unfairness from the body differences of male and female riders. If you have female sport, it's because we've, if you like, implicitly decided that male advantage in that sport counts, male advantage matters, and so for the sake of fairness, that advantage should be excluded from the female competition. So it's sort of like the fairness flows from the category rather than the fairness being something freestanding. Once we introduce the category of female sport, and we should have that category, then it's unfair to have male advantage in that category.
Yes, because I mean, what you're saying, though, Mr. Dr. Pike, is actually common sense, right? To most of my viewers, they'll be saying, okay, well, that's absolute common sense there. But the problem is that all of these groups will now claim discrimination and all the rest of it for not being able to take advantage of their unfair advantages in female sports. And we end up in a scenario where a government potentially capitulates because it doesn't want to be deemed, quote unquote, transphobic.
But there's no transphobia involved here. One of the interesting things about the FINA discussion and the FINA policy is that it
which is a swimming organisation, isn't it?
The possibility of an open competition. I think that's a very good move. It's something I've argued for quite a while. And the point of that is to say that gender identity doesn't matter in sport in this category. Mm-hmm. It's not relevant. You can have whatever gender identity or gender presentation that you want, and you can compete in an open category. So no one's asking you to deny anything about your identity. The question is really how that fits with the male category, which is a kind of quite interesting discussion, because the male category itself can be open because there's no built-in advantage that anyone has over male athletes.
Yes.
Just don't face this problem.
And I wonder how have you viewed, because this seems to have happened, and forgive my ignorance on the issue, you will know a lot more about it than I do, but this seems to have happened at an alarmingly fast pace, where we have this real exponential growth in people saying, I experience gender dysphoria, married with an activist class who, we've just lost Mr. Pike there, unfortunately. I was going to ask him about his views around the rise in gender dysphoria and what he thinks is to blame for that. But, folks, that was the senior lecturer in philosophy, ethics and metaphysics in sports, Dr. John Pike. We'll hopefully get him back another day. But on Thursday, Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi slammed a GCSE exam board's cultural vandalism after it ditched the famous poets Wilfred Owen, Philip Larkin and John Keats from English literature exams. They were replaced with artists chosen because of their characteristics like ethnicity, disability and LGBT status. Is this an affront to Britain's cultural heritage or a progressive, inclusive step? Well, joining me now is the Editor-in-Chief of the Good Schools Guide, Lord Ralph Lucas, and education commentator and former examiner, Anis Garfield. Now, can we start, Lord Ralph Lucas, with I'm going to ask you this. Can you remember any Wilfred Owen and John Keats poetry? What did they actually teach you? Because I honestly can't, if I'm honest with you, and maybe that just says that I'm an uncultured so-and-so. But what is it as pronounced in schools as we like to think?
I enjoy poetry. I'm useless at remembering it and quoting it, but I enjoy it. I think the fundamental problem here is that we are trying to restrict the number of poems that children study to 60, which is ridiculous. It doesn't begin to express the breadth of our civilization. And at a time when civilization is reasserting itself as a concept, when China and India and Russia are clearly going their own way, and the idea of universality of Western values has gone, it is really important that we have a clear concept of our own civilization. And you can't do it in 60 poems. The only reason for 60 is to make it easy for the examiners. And there are lots of ways around that now. We ought to have 600 poems up there for GCSE, not 60, and allow schools to choose.
Expand horizons, yes. I wonder then, what do you think about this idea that actually Britain's wartime art and history has become somewhat redundant and that actually we should move on from it? Because it strikes me that it's really important to never, ever forget that generation, both generations, whether it be World War I or World War II. And actually, instead of focusing on immutable characteristics, we should instead focus on the actually teaching at the next generation of our past and history and the important elements of it.
I think roots are enormously important to holding a country together, to a shared sense of who we are and a shared history, and to not to take any particular attitude to it. But my wife worked in prisons for 20 years. The common characteristic there was people with no history who only knew one parent, who had no roots in the world. To have a real connection back into who we are, something that the Jewish people do enormously well, is a real strength and something we absolutely ought. What are schools for if we don't get a grasp of who we are?
Well, indeed, I couldn't agree more. Anis Garfield, though, I wonder, have you agreed with what's been said thus far?
Well, yes, but I'm surprised he didn't know any Wilfred Owen. What passing bells for these who die as... I mean, we all, I thought, knew that. And as for Philip Larkin, who's been banned, he was appointed Poet Laureate, which he declined. His poems are poems of metre and balance. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what they've been replaced with, I must just read you out in case any of you understand this. I'll have to put on my specs to read you this. This is a Jamaican woman poet called Miss Lou, is her trade name. Me shame a ya so till al a. You with me? Me proudness drop a grunge. Now, is that better than... That is considered to be better than and don't we owe our school pupils the very best? This is an example of English literature. English literature.
That's right. Anis, though, I wonder what you say to those who say, well, actually, Britain has moved on. Britain is more multicultural. Britain is more diverse. Shouldn't we celebrate and reflect that in our curriculum?
No, we shouldn't. We are very lucky to have the English literature we have. And this exam is called English literature. There's a place for the Jamaican doggerel, I'm sure, somewhere, and all the other ones like that. But you cannot turf out Wilfred Owen, Philip Larkin, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and saying they're not as good. And I'm sure you'd agree. Anyone would agree. We want to give our pupils the very best. They have one go through their education, our children have. They deserve the best. Thank God for our education secretary, who realises it's a culture, whatever he said, barrage. And he expects the best. And we expect the best of our children. And I do not think...
I wonder...
Jamaican...
Yes. I agree with you completely, Anis. I could not agree more. But Lord Lucas, then, I'm wondering, do you actually feel confident about our future as a nation when there are so many attacks on our history and who we are as a nation? And that seems to be especially pronounced among members of the next generation. Is this just a rebellious streak, or do you think this is something more fundamental and actually part of our culture?
I think we're at a time of great danger. I think we really need, as Alice is saying, to absolutely hang on to our civilization as it is and to go back and to understand our history and to understand that extraordinary wealth of literature that we've created and which we want to be part of our world today. We should have confidence to do that. We should understand what great things have been done by our forebears and absolutely make them part of our own lives.
I say to hell with diversity, equality and whackery and wokery on the curriculum, and actually just teach our kids about our history, our past, and make them the best possible versions of themselves. But that was the editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide, Lord Ralph Lucas, and education commentator and former examiner, Anis Garfield. Thank you very much to the both of them. Now, folks, applications for the 2023 North East Tourism Awards have opened this week. Today's my first day presenting from the North East, my home, and the greatest region in the UK, of course. So it's a good time to look at the awards, which aim to actually boost tourism and investment in the North East of England. Joining me now on the show is Richard Coleman, owner of Coleman's Seafood Temple in South Shields, a previous award winner of the North East Tourism Awards. What's so great about our region then, and why do you reckon people ought to come here and celebrate the aspects of tourism industry that we've got?
I think the North East is a place to be celebrated, and these awards just are a great way of easily indicating and showing people that are coming to the North East and what we have to offer, and also just to show them the best of our region.
And I can hear that for my radio listeners, we can hear a busy background there, lots going on. What was the award that you actually won, and what did it do for the business?
So we won the Taste of North East England Award, which celebrates the best restaurant in the North East.
Wow.
So for us, it showcased us as one of the top restaurants in the North East. And give us a huge boost of people coming into the region.
Yeah, I mean, have you been keeping an eye on the awards this year? Are there any businesses that you reckon absolutely should be nominated for this?
So I know the nominations have just opened.
Yes.
But I think we're very rich in fantastic local businesses in the North East. And I think there's some amazing emerging talent still to come through in the North East. So I think whoever does it will be very very glad for the region for them to get it.
And I wonder then, how beneficial are these sort of awards for the region? Because a lot of people watching this may well be themselves attracted to the North East, and especially our accents are very popular here. But yeah. I'm wondering, what do you reckon we can actually do, because we are one of the most deprived regions in the whole of the country? Yeah. What can we actually do to make ourselves more competitive? What is it that you would like to see our politicians, for example, starting to do? Because let's not forget, Brexit was all about taking back control. Do you actually reckon enough attention is given to areas like the North East?
I think the North East is a massively undersung region in the UK. I think what we have to offer here is quite incredible. We've got amazing cities, we've got amazing coastline, we've got some incredible businesses in every sector, and I think we're often overlooked. And I think a huge push, and especially like awards like this, like the Tourism Awards, where we can drive businesses, local businesses, get them into the public eye and show what the North East has to offer is really important, because I do think as a region overall in the UK we are overlooked, and actually we have some of the best businesses and the best areas to offer in the whole of the UK.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more, mate. That was Richard Coleman, owner of Coleman's Seafood Temple, an award winner of the North East Tourism Awards. Cheers for your time. Now, folks, it's time for Grime Watch, a time to look at what you've been saying at home about the biggest stories of the week. This week, we had another Brexit anniversary, and I took to Twitter and I said, 6 years on, and I'd still vote to leave in a heartbeat. Nothing the EU has done over that 6-year period has made me regret that decision. Quite the reverse. A lot of you got in touch and replied. Lee said, I would vote leave again. If anything, I feel more strongly about it than ever before. Best decision this country has made. I agree with you, Lee. Angela says, I originally thought that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But now, seeing how the EU has treated us, I've since changed my mind. And Angela, of course, as you well know, the fastest vaccine rollout scheme, all of these other things, really important things that we couldn't have done if we were a member of the European Medicines Agency. However, Bob challenged me and he said, if after 6 years Brexit is going well, why are you Brexiteers still having to attack the EU constantly rather than focus on all the UK has done outside the bloc? Well, just look at all the agreements. Liz Truss has been hopping about the world like a kangaroo, signing deals here, there and everywhere. It's been absolutely cracking to see. And Helen asks the question, what about the 350 million quid a week the NHS was supposed to get? Well, actually, Helen, I think you'll find the NHS has had more than 350 million quid going into its coffers. If you ask me, the NHS is going to end up with more and more money, and until we accept in this country that it needs fundamental reform, it will continue to be broken and not deliver for the British people. But folks, that's just my 10 pence. As always, you let me know your view. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But folks, you've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for doing so. The show's on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 o'clock. But for now, I'll leave yous with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be breezy and unsettled with showers for northern and western areas. Let's look at the details. Showers across southwest England will continue to move through quite quickly, so there will be some late sunny spells. However, it'll feel quite fresh with a strong southwesterly breeze. In southeast England, it'll be a dry evening with sunny spells coming and going, feeling relatively fresh here too with a strengthening breeze. In South Wales, heavy showers will push north-eastwards throughout the evening, feeling quite cool exposed to the brisk westerly breeze and during any showers. In the Midlands, it will turn a little bit drier into this evening as showers move away to the north, so a mix of cloudy and clear spells and still the risk of the odd shower too. In northeast England, after a relatively dry day, cloud cover will increase for some with a risk of showers into the evening. Windy at the coast with gusts of 30 miles per hour. Southern Scotland will see sunshine and showers this evening as well, feeling cool whilst raining, but it will dry up quickly once they clear and the sun comes out once again. It'll be a very windy evening for the time of year in Northern Ireland. More persistent rain will continue in the west, whilst the east will see some sunny spells. Overnight it will remain clear in the east, but further west it'll turn much wetter again and the winds will pick up too. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Join me, Nana Akua,